Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for today's Lunch and Learn, which I am calling the mentor method, ways in which we can learn clinical supervision and mentorship practices. So this is just an overview of some of the things that we're going to cover today. So looking at supervision versus mentorship, understanding the Caribbean context of clinical supervision, understanding some of the core principles for effective supervision. We will share some practical strategies. We'll discuss supervisory skills and have a little bit of self-assessment. So, tell me if this resonates with any of you, anybody. Yes, no, could react, you could put something in the chat. Let's look specifically at the conspiracy theory guide. Supervision, mentoring, and coaching. All basically the same. Does anyone agree with that? Yes, no, kinda, you're not sure. You could type it in the chat. Make sure nothing is going on in chat there. All right. So there are some people who, or many people, I shouldn't say some, who think that all these three are the same. I have no expertise in coaching, so I will not be discussing coaching, but supervision and mentoring are the same. And it's very easy to fall into one of the two top extremes of these two memes here of what a supervisor is, where one feels like you are basically babying a grown adult, and the other is just like, they're grown, I don't need to do anything. So let's explore the ways in which we do not fall into any of these traps. So, supervision versus mentorship. Supervision is a formal hierarchical process where you or the supervisor oversees and evaluates the supervisee's performance to ensure that the tasks are being done correctly and according to the organization's standards. So a supervisor, therefore, is accountable for the supervisee's work. Mentorship, on the other hand, is an informal developmental relationship focused on the mentee's long-term career and personal growth. So mentors are accountable to the relationship between the mentor and the mentee by offering advice and a confidential space for development without that kind of power imbalance of a supervisory role. So some key differences here. In supervision, you're focused on the task or tasks, right? In the field of speech language pathology, we're focused on those clinical skills. So evaluation, parent reporting, goal writing, those types of things. And it's focused on the correct execution of each task or overarching project. So the project might be creating an AAC board for a client, or it might be writing up a complete home plan to send home with a family who may not be able to afford therapy regularly, you know? Whereas in mentorship, you're focusing on the holistic and developmental growth of the person, of the mentee themselves, and sometimes the mentor too. Supervision or supervisory exchange is structured formally. There's a hierarchical relationship where this person is senior to that person with some level of a power imbalance. right? And your supervisor is responsible for the supervisee's performance. So those of you who have been supervisors or who want to be supervisors, when your supervisee is doing work, you have to sign off on it as well. Like, because that's technically your work. That's what we're saying here. Whereas with the mentorship, it's typically informal. In our setting with the OTSLP board, there is a formal sense to it, but it is voluntary, built on the mutual understanding and desire to share knowledge and experience. So it's not necessarily that one is superior to the other. It's just that your mentee is newer or less experienced in whatever particular areas. The goals of supervision would be to ensure that your supervisee is compliant with the standards and policies of the organization. And sometimes that's the organization is the hospital, the private practice, the school that you're working in addition to the institution that is sending the supervisee to you, right? And there should be a system in place to monitor the progress on specific tasks. As opposed to mentorship is really just to provide that guidance, advice, support broader career goals. So for example, I work in academia. My mentee may not want to work in academia. My goal is to help them become a better speech therapist and not necessarily a speech therapist who works in academia as well, okay? With supervision, the supervisor is accountable to his or her organization, whereas the supervisee is accountable to his or her supervision. So in an academic sense, the supervisor, you need to ensure that you are doing what your company, what your school, what your hospital needs, and the supervisee would be doing what UE needs, in addition to what your school, hospital, clinic, etc. needs. In mentorship, the mentor is accountable to the relationship, not necessarily the organization. Again, in the Trinidad and Tobago sense, the organization would be the OTSLP board, but in our sense, the mentee is accountable to the board, not so much the mentor. So the mentor should not be the one running down the mentee, emailing the board. Nope, we don't want to be babying, right? The mentee is now a licensed professional who needs to be doing those things on their own. And oops, typo, that should be the role of the leader, not the roller, leader, where in supervision, the supervisor oversees, directs, and provide guidance on how to perform the specific tasks, whereas in mentorship, the mentor is advising, counseling, advocating, and even acting as a role model, offering perspective. Okay, do we see those differences? I hope we can see those differences. In the Caribbean context, we have different settings. So it might be an in-person supervisory experience where you are in the same building, in the same space as your supervisor, supervisee, sorry. And there are different types of distance learning, different distance supervision. So that might be intra or inter-island or territory. So in the case of Miss Mona Gardner, when she returned to Antigua, her mentor, talking about mentor here, her mentor could not be in person with her. So there was a virtual kind of relationship there. But sometimes we even have situations in mentorship and supervision where the supervisor might need to pick up themselves and go to wherever they their mentee or supervisee is. We know, and we all very intimately know, that our region has a challenge of resources. And many times that's human resource, where there are too many mentees to mentors, there are too many supervisees to supervisors, the settings, the availability, the time constraints, because everybody's leading busy lives, right? So that is something that is, I don't want to say unique to us in the Caribbean, but very specific to us in the Caribbean. However, on the other side, we do have a cultural richness and a kind of community engagement we don't necessarily hear about from other parts of the world. There are three main models of supervision. We have the 4x4x4 model that talks about 4 functions, 4 stakeholders, and 4 stages. There's also Gibbs' reflective cycle, which is a popular model for reflection. And then there's Kolb's experiential learning cycle, which links that reflection to delivering improved outcomes. So in the 4x4x4 model, we have the first thing we have is the 4 functions. Firstly, we're looking at competent and accountable performance. So this is where the supervisor is kind of in a managerial type function. Then there's continuing professional development. So you as the supervisor, that's your own formative development there. You are learning new skills, developing skills, acquiring skills through your own reading that has nothing to do with what your supervisee is doing. You are doing that for your development. There's personal support where you're supporting the supervisee. So that might be things like they can't get a grasp of those goals, or things like behavior management, which most students and even some of us still struggle with, supporting them direct through those developmental skills, and then engaging the individual with the organization. So sometimes that's acting as a mediator between you and someone who's your supervisee and someone who is senior to you, or sometimes that's acting as a mediator between your company and the university that the student is coming from. Then we have 4 stakeholders. So the workers, which would be you, your co-workers, anybody involved in getting the work done. The organization, which would be your organization. The partners, which would be in a student setting, would be the university. And then the service users, which will be the clients and their families. These are the 4 groups of people that we have to keep in mind when we are engaging in a supervisory exchange. Then, once we have all those things in mind, we have the 4 stages. So, the experience, what happened? Reflection, what was it like? Analysis, what does this mean? Action plan, what's next? So, engaging with a student, let's say the session goes, all right, you'll rate it a 6 out of 10 maybe. And you go through, okay, these are the things that happened. You talk about the facts. You're not talking about feelings, you're not talking about perception just yet. They chose good toys, they managed the situation for 15 minutes. However, the actual literal facts. Reflection is reflection on both parts. So you get your supervisee to reflect on, what do you think it was good? How do you think it went? What was going through your mind? And then you as the supervisor, okay, how did you perceive that? What could you have done to support the student or the client or the family better. And then analysis would be, okay, if they didn't, if the client, let's say, threw a toy and broke it, right? Are we looking at it? Are we deciding or thinking that your supervisor needs to work on behavior management? Or are we looking at it from the aspect that the client was particularly dysregulated today? Maybe it's both, maybe it's something else, but making sure that you're not just focusing on the how, but also the why. And then the action plan would be what's next. So action plan could be, okay, keep the toy out of reach or keep the toy hidden away. Try different things to get the client motivated that would keep them as regulated as possible so that we don't have any other destruction of toys, materials, etc. So make sure that with each session, and if, let's be real, it might not be each session, but every group of sessions that you're able to work through these things with your supervisee. In Gibbs' reflective cycle, where similar kinds of thoughts, but he describes 6 steps. So we have the description, again, the facts, what happened, feelings, what do you think and feel about it, the evaluation, what were the positives and negatives, analyzing it. So what sense can you make of it? And the you here is both you and the supervisee, both supervisor and supervisee. Conclusion, what else could you have done? And action, what will you do next time? So you could see that these are very similar to the 4 stages here in the 4x4x4, just expanded a little more. Lastly, we have Cole's experiential learning cycle, where we have those 4 stages that kind of touches all the bases. So we talk about having a concrete experience. Your supervisee must do a thing. Something must have been done. There's reflective observation, so they're reviewing, thinking back, abstract conceptualization, concluding and learning from the experience, and then active experimentation, planning and trying out what you have learned. So again, very similar to those other models, just using different words to kind of conceptualize the same sorts of things. So with that, Kolb theorizes about 4 distinct learning styles. Now, you know what the research is about learning styles, but here they're talking about how salient information reaches people best. So accommodation, that's feeling and doing. There are some supervisees who need to see how they feel about something before they do it. So many times I'm not good with kids, I feel they're not gonna like that. It's like, okay, cool, let's do it. Then you have converging, where you think about it. It's like, I think this is what I'm going to do. This is my plan in my head. And then they actually do it. And then there is diverging, so they're feeling and then watching it be done. And that's how the information concretizes for them before they actually do it. And then assimilating, where they think about it a little more concretely, they watch it be done before they, have the confidence or even the skill to do it. So it's about finding out in whichever ways how you think back on your experiences when you were being supervised. Which one of these kind of applied to you the best? And is this what you expect of your supervisees, or do your supervisees learn in a different way? We have 4 principles of effective supervision. So we have trust and communication, which focuses on establishing rapport and open dialogue. So Not saying that every supervisor are gonna be besties, but enough where it's collegial and you both can speak openly, professionally with each other. Reflective practice, encouraging self-assessment and critical thinking. So it's not that you tell your supervisor, do this in a very specific way. You know, you make sure that you get them to derive their own thoughts and their own methodologies about things. And then you correct and guide as necessary. Cultural responsiveness, so respecting people's own diversity and context. And then goal alignment. So collaborate on clear, achievable learning goals. And these are not only the client's goals, but your goals that you might set for your supervisee and the goals that the supervisee has set for themselves. So, a supervisee might, their goal, they want to get better at goal writing. And your goal for them might be better at time management. They might think their time management is fine, but you as the supervisor, you can see that their time management is not that great. And while you might think their goal writing is fine or okay enough, that's something that's personal to them. So finding some middle ground to be able to achieve their goals and to achieve your goals for them as well. Any questions or anything so far? No. Just checking to see. Okay. Put something in the chat. No, okay. Moving along. Now, before you start supervising, make you engage in self-reflection. Recognize what your personal biases and assumptions might be. Well, and sometimes, you know, the institute, because I'm not talking about just you here. I'm trying to be nice and vague. You might get a student from somewhere else, right? From foreign university who comes to Trinidad, etc., etc. Do you have assumptions about where they studied? Do you have assumptions about what they might know? Their level of experience. Is this a first year student, a final year student? Is this someone who comes from a different cultural, ethnic background than the majority of your clientele? You know, those kinds of things you have to be not conscious of, to be like, oh my gosh, I'm such a bad person. But how you self-evaluate, as you self-evaluate so that you can be a fair evaluator of your supervisee. Identify strength to leverage in your supervision. So some of you might be really good at behavior management, and maybe you might be like, okay, this is my thing. When supervisees come to me, this is the strength that I'm going to offer them. Some people might be like building family rapport, getting family buy-in. That's your strength. And that is the kind of way you encourage your supervisees along. Now, they might not, I mean, I don't think any supervisee gets as good as their supervisor in any one clinical practicum. But, you know, make sure that you yourself have something to leverage, something to offer in that supervisee's development. And pinpoint areas for your own improvement. And I'll be the first to say my time management sucks. So I know that when I am going into my supervisory experiences, it's something that I have to be conscious of and that I have to continuously improve upon, because I don't know my supervisee's way of dealing with time management, and I don't want to make things worse for them, right? They are a student, right? They are now learning. My weaknesses cannot also become their weaknesses, but I need to know what my weaknesses are first, right? So you want to set goals for yourself and the supervisee and make sure you have an understanding of the institution's requirements and protocols. So at UE, we do have a skills sheet that we want students to be able to make sure that their supervisors, yes, they attain the skill or they show that they can perform the skill. Things like we have an evaluation form, we talk about oral communication, written communication, inter and intrapersonal skills, those types of things. Different institutions that may send students to you will have different requirements, or they prioritize different things. So, you can't, while you as a person might be who you are clinically as a clinician, kind of have to tailor your supervising to what the institution might also need of their students. And sometimes that's acknowledging, I don't think I can be a suitable supervisor for X. I don't think I can be a suitable supervisor for Y. It really can come down to that. Okay. So some very practical, straightforward things you as a supervisor can do. Structure your supervision sessions. So whether it is, okay, for this session, I think the goals are all right. We need to work on your SOAP notes, and your feedback would be based on the SOAP notes. Sometimes that might mean you have a feedback form, or you have a cloud-based drive where you can set certain parameters around things that are being done. However, that structure works for you and your supervisee. You want to make sure that it is as consistent as possible. Sometimes, depending on how your caseload might be, you might not be able to give feedback after every session. It might be after every 2 sessions. It might be at the end of the day. It might be a situation where you need to schedule a separate meeting time to give feedback. Or maybe in the interaction, you are writing things down and you could just slide it to the student or put it in a file so that they have access to that feedback in a more tangible way. You want to support clinical reasoning and autonomy. It's not about babying. It's not about hand-holding. It's not about perfection, right? I don't think any of us think that we are perfect clinicians. So it would be kind of unreasonable to expect your students to be perfect clinicians as well, right? And you want them to be able to be autonomous. So sometimes, heading back to the structure one, sometimes it might be laying out that plan. At your next session, I want you to be able to bring the client inside, talk to the family, all these on your own. Or sometimes it's staggering it. Okay, I will bring the client in, you talk to the family. You bring the client in, giving them things to do on their own, under your supervision, of course, but not just have them become a mini you, right? Trinidad speech therapy workforce will not be great if we had lots of mini Kiaras running around. Like, we don't want that. We definitely don't want that. We want people to develop their own individuality and develop their own clinical skills and reasonings. Now, they are students. They don't have a lot of clinical reasoning yet. So it's our role as the supervisor to help them along to develop those skills as well. You want to make sure too, I think most important, you want to make sure too that you are addressing underperformance professionally. So we're talking about constructive feedbacking. So we don't want that you just said, well, this was bad, I don't know what you're doing, why would you even bother? And while you might actually be thinking those things in your head, and let's be real, we are human, we might actually be thinking those things in our head. We kind of also have to keep in mind that these are other people, and we don't want anyone talking to us about that. And they are learning. We are the experts, and they are learning from us. So it comes back to that self-reflection. Are they underperforming because of something I did or did not do? That's kind of the first flag you need to check yourself for. And if you realize, no, wasn't me, then, talk to you try to use words that talk about the things that they did, the actions. Don't talk about the person. So you don't want to say you are disorganized. You say this session was disorganized or unplanned, or you don't want to say you don't know XYZ. It's like, so instead of saying you don't know, how about you look into so and so more? I have some resources that I can share with you. But telling them, and no, you're not mincing your words, you're not trying to be politically correct, but you're also trying to be professional while being kind. You want to incorporate reflective questions. How did you think that was? How do you feel about that? What opinions did you derive from that interaction? By modeling it yourself. Okay. So Kiara, I like to lead with the reflective questions. And if I see that they're day in headlights, I start kind of framing the answers the way I would frame the answers. Like, well, I think that he may have been having a dysregulated day. Mom did express that he didn't have his nap. So I am doing the self-reflection. And don't be afraid to seek out feedback about your supervision style. Again, we are trained professionals. We know what we're doing, but we are trained as SLPs. We are not trained as supervisors, right? So a question I like to ask my students, what do you need from me? Like, what can I do to help you along? It's like, oh, well, can I get the feedback? Like I said, my time management is poor. Can I get the feedback in a more timely manner? Can you share the resources with me earlier, so that I have, and that helps me know how I can be a better supervisor for that person. And sometimes what works for one person is not for another person, doesn't work for another person. We're not expecting that everyone changes every single time, but within reason, right? And then you want to schedule check-ins, and these could be academic check-ins, these could be clinical check-ins, these could be personal check-ins. During my first clinical practicum as a student, no, my second clinical practicum as a student, an aunt of mine passed away. And I was so grateful that my supervisor was able to do that personal check-in. How are you? Do you need to take the day? I didn't need to take the day, but the fact that she could see that outside of those clinical meetings, sessions, so in those pockets that my mood will change, she was concerned for her clients that my sadness might impact the clients that she was seeing, and that can't be a thing. But it's not just, let me flip that around. When I was doing my placement in the skilled nursing facility, I did not quite have a grasp on some of the cognitive strategies. And my supervisor, in her wisdom, asked, have you learned about XYZ yet? And I said, no, actually, that's on the course outline for a course I was doing that semester for a few weeks down. She's like, okay. So she, rather than assume that I was incompetent, she asked about the actual academic theoretical knowledge that I had beforehand. And she was able to provide me with resources before my lecturer did, so that I could, I could be and I could work in a skilled nursing facility. So it's looking at the academic skills, the clinical skills, and we're comfortable checking in on the personal skills as well. So we mentioned supervisors. Yeah. I saw this and I was like, so apt. I did have one supervisor who just, I don't know, refused to tell me anything good and really broke my spirit. I still passed, but I passed on paper. You couldn't tell me that that supervisor thought I was any good because I never heard anything good. I never saw any positive feedback. She was really, really good at letting me know that I suck. So I have a video here. I hope it will play on how to give great feedback. 1 second. I don't think I shared with audio. So let me reshare. Yeah, there we go.
If you look at like a carpenter, they have a toolbox. A dentist, they have their drills. In our era and the type of work most of us are doing, the tool we most need is actually centered around being able to give and receive feedback well. Humans have been talking about feedback for centuries. In fact, Confucius, way back in 500 BC, talked about how important it is to be able to say difficult messages well. But to be honest, we're still pretty bad at it. In fact, a recent Gallup survey found that only 26% of employees strongly agree that the feedback they get actually improves their work. Those numbers are pretty dismal. So what's going on? The way that most people give their feedback actually isn't brain friendly. People fall into one of two camps. Either they're of the camp that is very indirect and soft, and the brain doesn't even recognize that feedback is being given, or it's just simply confused. Or they fall into the other camp of being too direct. And with that, it tips the other person into the land of being defensive. And there's this part of the brain called the amygdala, and it's scanning at all times to figure out whether the message has a social threat attached to it. With that, we'll move forward in defensiveness, or we'll move backwards in retreat. And what happens is the feedback giver then starts to dysregulate as well. They add more ums and ahs and justifications, and the whole thing gets wonky really fast. It doesn't have to be this way. I and my team have spent many years going into different companies and asking who here is a great feedback giver. Anybody who's named again and again, we actually bring into our labs to see what they're doing differently. And what we find is that there's a 4-part formula that you can use to say any difficult message well. Okay, are you ready for it? Here we go. The first part of the formula is what we call the micro yes. Great feedback givers begin their feedback by asking a question that is short but important. It lets the brain know that feedback is actually coming. It would be something, for example, like, do you have 5 minutes to talk about how that last conversation went? Or I have some ideas for how we can improve things. Can I share them with you? This micro yes question does 2 things for you. First of all, it's going to be a pacing tool. It lets the other person know that feedback is about to be given. And the second thing it does is it creates a moment of buy-in. I can say yes or no to that yes or no question. And with that, I get a feeling of autonomy. The second part of the feedback formula is going to be giving your data point. Here you should name specifically what you saw or heard and cut out any words that aren't objective. There's a concept we call blur words. A blur word is something that can mean different things to different people. Blur words are things that are not specific. So for example, if I say, you shouldn't be so defensive, or you could be more proactive. What we see great feedback givers doing differently is they'll convert their blur words into actual data points. So for example, instead of saying, you aren't reliable, we would say, you said you'd get that email to me by 11, and I still don't have it yet. Specificity is also important when it comes to positive feedback. And the reason for that is that we want to be able to specify exactly what we want the other person to increase or diminish. And if we stick with blur words, they actually won't have any clue particularly what to do going forward to keep repeating that behavior. The third part of the feedback formula is the impact statement. Here you name exactly how that data point impacted you. So for example, I might say, because I didn't get the message, I was blocked on my work and couldn't move forward. Or I really liked how you added those stories because it helped me grasp the concepts faster. It gives you a sense of purpose and meaning and logic between the points, which is something the brain really craves. The fourth part of the feedback formula is a question. Great feedback givers wrap their feedback message with a question. They'll ask something like, well, how do you see it? Or, this is what I'm thinking we should do, but what are your thoughts on it? What it does is it creates commitment rather than just compliance. It makes the conversation no longer be a monologue, but rather becomes a joint problem-solving situation. But there's one last thing. Great feedback givers not only can say messages well, but also they ask for feedback regularly. In fact, our research on perceived leadership shows that you shouldn't wait for feedback to be given to you, what we call push feedback, but rather you should actively ask for feedback, what we call pulling feedback. Pulling feedback establishes you as a continual learner and puts the power in your hands. The most challenging situations are actually the ones that call for the most skillful feedback. But it doesn't have to be hard. Now that you know this 4-part formula, you can mix and match it to make it work for any difficult conversation.
All right, so hopefully that was helpful. I will share the link to this video so that, we can follow up on it because it was a good reminder for me as well. So I would like maybe one different person to answer each of these. You can say it out loud, you could type it in the chat, any of the above. Which supervisory skills you want to improve? Who mentors or mentored you? Is there anyone that you mentor? And thinking back on those, what stands out to you in those relationships? So the main idea here is to recreate the good and eliminate the bad. I will start. It's that particular supervisor, who probably never said anything good to me. I make it my job, regardless of how I perceived an interaction, I perceived a supervisee's skill, I make sure and I say something good. So sometimes it was, I like the items that you chose, which is, simple, but I kind of start there so that they know that, okay, she doesn't think I suck. Whereas with the other supervisor who, checked in on me when, my aunt had passed away, I check in with my supervisees. So that's something I try to recreate. Again, not trying to be too pushy. I don't want to be in everybody's business. But if I see that, and sometimes it's a good thing, I check and it's like, hey, how was your birthday? Because they would have had a birthday the week before or something before then. Just to, make sure that I'm trying to keep as much bad out and as much good in. So does anybody want to share if they have any supervisory skills that they want to improve? I do have a sheet with some supervisory skills that I will share as well. Yes, Nadita. So Nadita is saying, as a mentor, I always begin with the positives and then touch on the areas they feel like could have improved. Usually, you'd say them and extend on them. That's good. Thanks, Nadita. Anybody else?
I feel
Go ahead. Go
oh,
ahead.
sorry, you can go first, Laura.
No, you go, Stephanie. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say 2 things. First of all, well, I'm supervising the 3 new Tobago-based therapists who are all at the hospital with me. And so it's a little bit, well, I'm mentoring them, but I'm also supervising them because I'm their supervisor and ultimately
Right,
I'm
yeah. So there is some overlap here.
Yeah, it's a little confusing because ultimately I'm responsible for the performance of the department and making sure the standards are met, making sure the documentation is done on time, and making sure that, you know, the skills they demonstrate are evidence-based and representative of the organization. So it's a little tricky, the the division between mentor and supervisor, you know, and I don't know if you have anything to share about that, Kiara.
Yeah,
But
that's like, yeah. So with the supervising, you like I mentioned before, you have to uphold the TRHA standards, regardless of whatever it is. You are the head of department, you are the supervisor, you have to make sure that they are doing things according to the standards of the institution, right? However, as a mentor, the line slightly shifts where it's, so you are guiding them in the background, but you said you might say something like, have you considered doing XYZ LMNOP? And you describe the very specific thing for, because I know you have the wards, you have the outpatient clinics, you have the health centers. So things might be different depending on where they are. And you give that guidance, you advise them. But then what is the word to use? I guess appraisal, if that's a fair word to use, comes on the supervisory appraisal comes on the execution of the thing. So the mentoring is you give the advice, you share the resources, XYZ. And then the supervision is, are you doing it the way you're supposed to do it according to our institution standards? Does that make sense?
yeah, it does. And our appraisal form stinks. The performance appraisal form I have to fill out.
Would you imagine?
It's so like, oh, it's so uncomfortable. We have to rate each individual on a 5-point scale on really subjective qualitative things like
Yeah.
dignity. And yeah, it's yes.
How do you rate anyway? So I feel like, do you feel like then that you're in a situation where you're having to provide or talk about mentoring outcomes as the supervisor?
I don't understand.
I feel like things like dignity and those kinds of things would be something you talk about as a mentor, you know? Your professional reputation and the type and quality of work that you do.
Yeah,
Then
well,
you have to fill
in
that
that
out in
case,
an appraisal form.
when I'm doing the TRHA performance appraisal, I have to take off the mentor hat and rate those qualitative
Yeah.
things in terms of their performance, like as it's the objective performance appraisal. But it's it's a little bit blurry, you know, it's a little bit blurry. And then you know, like I know for me with the 3 mentees that I'm supervising, and I know it's abnormal that I have 3, you know, for everyone listening here, but it's just because I'm the only one in Tobago right now who's able to supervise directly. But what I have found to be the most helpful, and what I believe they have found them to be the most helpful, and when I did my CFY in the US, all of my supervision was direct, and my supervisor was in the sessions observing, and I got feedback each time. And that's kind of what helped me the most. And so that's what I've been doing with all of them. I've seen that they have all had a lot of professional growth. And they, you know, I'll notice things when they're doing therapy and give them ideas of different treatment activities that maybe they wouldn't have considered, or talk about different methodologies or whatever. But I don't want to be too like instructorish with them, you know, in terms of the mentor capacity. So it's kind of like walking a delicate balance.
Yeah. A recommendation I would give then is to, yes, if you have to sit in, you have to sit in, but then maybe set up a separate meeting time or some point, you know, on the lunch break, and you all sit together, if you all sit together for lunch, and, you know, have those discussions kind of informally. So it's not, I'm giving you feedback on this thing right now in the supervisory sense, but rather as in the mentoring sense. So you're still doing your supervising work, but you're still providing that mentorship, that guidance, that counsel outside of that. Just a recommendation. I don't know.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
That's a good idea. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem, Stephanie. I know Laura had to leave, but I'm also conscious of the time, so I'm gonna just move ahead. Yeah, and these are some resources that I found. So I will share these with you all as well, these links. I'll share the link to the video and the clinical skills that I think I have that somewhere that I could probably show you all really quickly. If anyone has any questions or anything in the meantime, I can pull that up. No problem. No problem, Isabel. Take care. Bye-bye. You're welcome. Okay. Hi, Nadita. I'm sure I have it somewhere. Okay. Maybe I don't have it anyway. And I will be able to share it with you all after. So this has been lovely. Thank you all for joining me on this Lunch and Learn about supervision skills and mentoring. And hopefully we'll see you all at the next Lunch and Learn. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Sorry I took up so much time with my contribution.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. It was very valuable. It was very, very valuable to understand what those differences are.
Thank you.
Right. Take care, Stephanie. Bye.